Hi, I'm Daniel Gold, and welcome to the Gold Standard Leadership Lab. By day, I'm a partner at a leading advisory firm where I draw upon my background as an attorney to help my clients succeed. This podcast, though, is my personal project, completely separate and apart from my day job, but reflects the same passion that I exhibit everywhere for teaching, mentoring, and helping others succeed through simple, impactful lessons. It is my hope that you'll walk away with practical takeaways to help you on your leadership journey. Thanks for being a part of this community and for joining me in the Leadership Lab. Before we get into today's episode, a quick word from a sponsor I am personally connected to. This podcast exists because I believe that leadership is a practice. And practice happens everywhere. In the lab, in the field, and even on a river in Europe. In July of 2027, I am boarding an AMA Waterways river cruise for a 7-night sailing on the Rhine. Amsterdam to Basel, through the Rhine castles, and into the Swiss Alps. 7 nights on the water. My wife, a luxury travel designer at M. Markham Travel, has secured exclusive preferred rates on this specific sailing just for listeners of this show. This is not something available to the general public. She put this together just for GSL listeners. M. Markham Travel specializes in curating experiences that are worth the trip, and this itinerary is a genuinely exceptional one. If you have been thinking about a European river cruise, this is the sailing to book, and this is the rate to do it at. Here's what will make this sailing different for GSL listeners. I will be on that boat. Come find me on the deck. Bring your questions about the Golden Leadership Cycle or whatever you are working on through right now. We'll talk. No conference room, no agenda, no clock. To see the full itinerary and lock in your preferred rate, head over to mmarkhamtravel.com/GSL. That is mmarkhamtravel.com/GSL. Spots at this rate are very limited. If you are planning summer 2027 travel, do not wait on this one. Head over to mmarkhamtravel.com/GSL. All right, let's get started. I want to take you back to a conference room sometime in the mid-2000s. I am sitting in the audience at a legal technology presentation, and I could not tell you who was presenting, and I could not tell you what the topic was. What I can tell you is that within 8 minutes, half the room had their BlackBerries out. The other half had that particular look on their face that legal professionals get when they're performing attentiveness. Their eyes forward, but their minds, well, they were definitely somewhere else entirely. And I'm sitting there watching it happen, thinking to myself, if I am ever going to be successful selling legal technology to a room filled with attorneys and be exceptional at it, I cannot be that person at that podium. I cannot build a career on making smart people pretend to pay attention to me. So that moment set me down a rabbit hole. I devoured books such as Slideology, written by Nancy Duarte, Presentation Zen by Gar Reynolds, and Steve Gallo's The Presentation Secrets of Steve Jobs. The neuroscience of how human beings process information and why stories survive in memory when bullet points evaporate in 30 seconds is incredible. I started studying what moves people. And what I found was that the answer had nothing at all to do with someone's credentials. It's never the title. It was never the case study with all the impressive metrics and all of the great data points. It was always the human being underneath all of that. I tested that theory a few years later when the company I worked for at the time ran an internal innovation contest. The goal was to record a 5-minute video presentation that would be broadcast to all employees on your best idea to help the company become more innovative. Now, I had been deep in Nancy Duarte's work on leading with story instead of data. My video was about how our company become more innovative by being better storytellers when delivering presentations. So I picked up a camcorder, because this was well before Zoom or before any of that was normal, pointed it at my face, and introduced myself. Not with my title, not with my credentials, but instead with where I lived, what I loved, and a photo of my dog at the time, a mini golden doodle. Her name was Latke, and I spelled it phonetically on the slide, Latke, in curly brackets because I wanted everyone to get it right. I put up that photo of Latke well before my JD. And at the end of the video, I asked every employee who watched it to email me if they remembered her name. And I received about 100 emails. Now, I won the Innovation Award, but that's not why I tell this story. What was more telling was in that moment, a philosophy was confirmed that I had been building without even realizing it. Nobody really cares about the credentials. Why? Because if you were not qualified, you would not be in the room to begin with. Period. Hard stop. What people decide in every meeting, every presentation, every client interaction is whether they trust the human being in front of them. You cannot build that trust by performing competently. You build it by being real. Now, I just spent 3.5 days at this past week at a leadership conference. 5 speakers, 5 completely different backgrounds. A social anthropologist who had spent her career doing corporate ethnography. A physician and former ER doctor who burned out at 34 and built a framework to help leaders understand their own energy. A retired Green Beret who spent 2 decades in the most trust-depleted places on earth. A former tech executive who built a coaching program that reached thousands of people in nearly 100 countries. And a business coach who spent 30 years watching organizations drift away from the very thing that made them worth being a part of. So 5 different speakers, 5 totally different careers, 5 completely different vocabularies, and yet, oddly enough, they all made the same exact argument. Now, I don't mean that they covered the same topics. I mean that underneath the different stories and the frameworks and entry points, they all pointed to the same thing, the same problem. They pointed to the same gap. They pointed to the same cost. I spent the entire week thinking about the through line amongst each of those 5 speakers. And once I found it, it was so obvious I could not believe that it had taken me that long. And here it is. The most expensive thing in leadership is the distance between who you are and who your professional environment trained you to perform. I'm going to say that again. The most expensive thing in leadership is the distance between who you are and who your professional environment trained you to perform. That is what all 5 of them were saying. And let me show you what I mean. So the retired Green Beret used an iceberg analogy. The tip is the modern world, the metrics, the org charts, the quarterly results, etc. 20% of what is available to us. Now, 80% of what makes human beings effective in the hardest moments lives below that waterline. The meaning-seeking, emotionally driven, story-hungry part of our human nature has been around since the beginning of humanity. And his argument was that we have been so conditioned to operate at the tip of that iceberg, that 20%, that we have buried the 80%. It has become invisible. And then we wonder why we cannot move people when everything is falling apart. So the anthropologist said that what makes an organization fail is not the lack of vision at all. It is complexity. The accumulated weight of systems, structures, and unspoken rules that over time train people to show up as a smaller, safer, more compliant version of themselves. She called culture the practice of values over time, not the values on the wall, the actual repeated daily decisions about who you choose to be in the room. And we have spoken about that before on the Gold Standard Leadership Lab. Now, the physician said, your body is keeping a score you are not reading. You have one nervous system. It does not have a commute. The stress you suppress at work shows up at the dinner table. The stress you bury at home shows up in your client interactions. She repeatedly said that if your mind and body disagree, the body will always win every single time. Now, the tech executive talked about an invisible cage. 9 words that high performers have been conditioned to fear being called: reckless, brutal, shameless, selfish, nosy, manipulative, weird, bossy, and obsessed. She said that those words are just leadership virtues with the volume turned up. The fear of being called any one of them is what keeps people following instead of leading. And finally, the business coach said that successful organizations do not lose their way due to a lack of vision, but rather through drift and the tyranny of incrementalism. Day by day, decision by decision, the thing that made them extraordinary becomes ordinary, and nobody notices until the numbers finally tell the story. So there you have it, 5 frameworks, 5 vocabularies, same exact argument. The training that made you successful is the same training that is making you less human. Why? The gap between who you present yourself to be and who you actually are is costing you and everyone around you. Now, I've spent 95% of my professional career in legal technology, software, and IT managed services. And when I look back across those 24 years, I can see the same pattern playing out over and over. Every environment I entered, I looked for the human story underneath the technical product. And I told that story when everyone around me was telling the technical one. The Latke deck, the blog posts I've written where I used Cookie Monster and I Love Lucy, or the Kansas City Royals winning the 2015 World Series, and the art and science of roasting coffee, all to explain legal technology, software, and services concepts. Because I believed, and I still believe, that if I could make someone smile or see something familiar before I made them think about data preservation and proportionality, they would retain what I was teaching them. The castle metaphor presentation I built, in which I used a medieval fortress under siege to explain why your company's data is actually less secure than you think, because I knew that the attorneys understood castle walls and moats in a way they did not always understand network perimeters and access controls. And along the way, I created a video series called Gold Nuggets, short and direct, my face and my voice instead of another slide deck about compliance requirements and feature matrices. And then there's the RV camping piece that I wrote, in which I connected a family road trip to project management in legal software and services. And then most recently, in which I went all the way back to ancient Greek philosophy to the word krino, meaning to judge, to separate, to discern, to argue that how human beings are not in the loop when it comes to generative artificial intelligence, but rather they are in the lead, optimized as a result of leveraging AI in a way that doesn't give away an attorney's cognitive and ethical actions that defines the profession. Full tilt every time. Now, I want to be clear. I call out each of these examples not as like a humble brag, but because I want to tell you that I deployed a very deliberate philosophy. While it started as survival to do my job better in the very early years of this profession, so people wouldn't fall asleep or fiddle with their iPhones during my presentations, I studied storytelling because I realized that authentic, true humanity on display is what cements business relationships, not a gimmicky closing line used in sales. And every time I led with the human angle, it worked. Every time I let the professional register win, every time I buried the story and led with the feature or the frameworks or the metric, something got let on the table. Every environment has its own gravitational pull. The firms and organizations we work for are not trying to diminish us. Most of the time, they are not even aware they are doing it. It's just the accumulated weight of professional norms, risk management instincts, and the unspoken understanding that a certain register is acceptable and that a certain kind of expression raises eyebrows. I have navigated that tension myself. There have been moments when I had to find the version of my approach that the institution could hold and accept, that it would be smaller than what I knew would work. And that's not a complaint. It's just an honest description of what most people inside large organizations live with, and what most of them have never named out loud. Your cage might be institutional. A firm culture that rewards a certain kind of professionalism and views anything outside that registers as a liability. Your cage might be a manager who told you to tone it down. It might be an industry that has decided gravitas looks a specific way and anything that deviates is suspect. Might be the accumulated weight of watching people get rewarded for performing competence and penalized for displaying uncertainty. The bars of this invisible cage are different for everyone. Most high performers are inside of one, though. Most of them have been in it so long that they have stopped noticing that it is there. The question one of those speakers put to the room this week, and I'm going to put it to you now, is this. If 80% of your effectiveness lives below the waterline, what have you buried? What did the professional environment teach you to suppress? What would you do differently if you stopped being afraid of the word reckless or vulnerable or too much? Put it another way, what is your Latke? And when did you stop putting her first? So here's one question to sit with this week. Think about the last high-stakes conversation you had. A client meeting, an internal presentation, or a difficult conversation with someone on your team. And ask yourself this question. What did you know was true or feel was important that you chose not to say because it felt too human, too personal, or too much? The leaders your audience will remember 20 years from now are not going to be the ones who had the best slide decks. I assure you of that. They are, though, the ones who will tell the truth about what the work costs, why it matters, and who they really are beneath their credentials. They are the ones who will put their Latke first. I've been working on a book for the past year, and the argument at the center of that book is simple. The leaders worth following are not the ones who make themselves indispensable. They are the ones who made themselves unnecessary by pouring so much of themselves into the people around them that their leadership lived on long after they left the room. But you cannot make yourself unnecessary if you are performing a smaller version of yourself. The leaders who leave something behind worth having the ones who refuse to stay inside of the invisible cage. Persistently, over time, choosing the human angle, choosing humanity when the professional environment was pulling toward the credential angle. That is what this book is about, and that is what today was all about. And if this episode landed for you, I want you to share it with one person who needs to hear it. Oh, and if you remember my dog's name from my video, drop it in the comments. Remember, leadership isn't about perfection. It is about progress. Take this lesson, put it into action, and continue setting the gold standard in your own life and at work. I'll see you all next time.